All right, today we are diving deep. We're talking about a philosopher who looked straight into the abyss and didn't even flinch. We're talking about the incredible French-Algerian writer and thinker, Albert Camus.
So Camus kicks off his most famous philosophical essay with this. Wow, what a line. And he's not just trying to be edgy here. What he's really saying is, before we can even begin to ask what the meaning of life is, we have to answer a much more basic question. Is life even worth living in the first place?
So how did the man who framed that ultimate question so perfectly answer it for himself? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore. To really get his answer, you've got to understand the man himself. Albert Camus was born back in 1913 in French Algeria. And he wasn't just some philosopher in an office, he was a novelist, a journalist, a playwright, really a moral force in a century that was just being torn apart by war and conflict.
Yeah, see, Camus' philosophy wasn't born in some quiet, cozy library. It was forged in the fire. He grew up poor. His dad was killed in World War I when he was just a baby. And later, as a journalist working for the French resistance during World War II, he was fighting fascism with his words, with real courage. This was a man who knew what struggle felt like, deep in his bones.
So, how does a guy who's seen all that chaos find a reason to keep going? Well, his answer starts with one central, really powerful idea.
For Camus, the whole thing hinges on this idea of a clash. See, the world itself isn't absurd, and we aren't absurd. The absurd is the conflict. It's that painful gap between us, humans who are desperately searching for meaning, and a universe that just gives us nothing. It's like screaming a question into the cosmos and all you hear back is silence. That feeling? That's the absurd.
And this is where the story of Sisyphus comes in. You probably know it. His punishment from the gods is this eternity of pointless work. He struggles to push this huge rock to the top of a hill, and just when he gets there, it rolls all the way back down. He has to start over. Forever. For Camus, this was the perfect metaphor for being human. We're always pushing, always looking for a purpose, and the universe just stays silent and indifferent.
Now, I know this can sound pretty bleak, and it's really important to separate absurdism from a couple of its philosophical cousins. So you have nihilism, which basically looks at the silent universe and says, well, then nothing matters. I'm out. Then you have existentialism, from Camus's frenemy Jean-Paul Sartre, which says, the universe is silent? Perfect. I'm totally free to invent my own meaning from scratch. But absurdism, it does something different. It says we have to hold both things in our head at once, our burning need for meaning and the universe's silence. It's not a conclusion you reach. It's that tense, constant state of confrontation. And that's where life is lived.
So, if the problem is this constant confrontation with the absurd, what's the solution? Camus doesn't just leave us hanging. He gives us this powerful, three-part game plan for how to live a full life, not by ignoring the absurd, but by staring it right in the face.
His answer has three key steps. First up is revolt. This means constantly looking at the absurd and refusing to give in to despair. You don't escape it, you live in defiance of it. Second is freedom. Once you realize there's no cosmic rulebook or divine plan, you are completely, radically free to live by your own code. And third, passion. Since this is the one life you know you have to live it as intensely as you can. For Camus, this meant seeking the quantity of experiences, just soaking up as much of life in all its variety as possible.
This quote from his book, The Rebel, is everything. It's his answer to Descartes' famous, I think, therefore I am. For Camus, it's not our private thoughts that define us. It's our shared rebellion against our condition, against injustice, against the absurd. That act of revolt is what connects all of us and confirms that we, together, exist.
And the thing about Camus is, this wasn't just some neat theory he wrote down. His entire life was a demonstration of this philosophy of revolt, freedom, and passion.
Let's actually take a look at how his own actions were a perfect reflection of this deep, philosophical commitment to rebellion.
I mean, you can just see this thread of revolt woven through his entire life. His journalism always stood up for people who were being oppressed. His work with the French resistance was a literal life-and-death fight against tyranny. Even his big public breakup with Sartre was an act of revolt. He refused to accept that any political ideology was worth sacrificing real human beings for some imaginary utopia in the future.
And then, at just 46 years old, at the absolute peak of his career, the ultimate absurdity strikes. The great philosopher who taught us how to live with life's randomness was killed in a pointless car crash. And here's the final, cruel irony. He had an unused train ticket in his pocket.
He wasn't even supposed to be in that car. It was like the universe was having the last silent laugh.
So, this brings us right back to where we started. Back to our friend Sisyphus and that giant rock. How on earth can we find any meaning, let alone happiness, in a fate like that?
I mean, at first glance, his life looks like the very definition of a tragedy, right? It's just endless, pointless suffering. But Camus tells us to look closer, because there's a hidden triumph in there.
Is his life a tragedy? Camus' answer is a defiant no. He actually calls Sisyphus the ultimate absurd hero. And here's why. It's because Sisyphus is fully conscious of his situation. Think about that moment when he's walking back down the hill to get the rock again. In that pause, he is completely aware. He knows his fate. And in that moment of lucid, clear-eyed consciousness, he becomes superior to his punishment. He is free to scorn the gods and find his meaning not in getting to the top, but in the struggle itself.
And that's really true for all of us, isn't it? Think about our own lives, the endless to-do lists, the projects that feel like pushing a boulder, trying to find connection in a world that can feel so disconnected. The simple act of living, of creating something, of loving someone, it's all a form of rebellion. We keep going in an effort that the universe tells us is pointless, and in that very perseverance, we find our dignity, we find our purpose.
And so we end with Camus' most famous, most provocative line. He's not saying Sisyphus is skipping down the hill whistling a happy tune. He's giving us a challenge. He's telling us that happiness and the absurd are not mutually exclusive, that real freedom, real joy, comes from looking at the struggle head-on, embracing it, and finding our purpose right there inside it. Because the struggle itself is enough to fill a human heart.